6. African American Literature, Music, and Protest. An interdisciplinary and cultural examination of African American literature and music and their interconnected relationships to politics and protest. I will be your instructor, Dr. DrCampbell. This course centers on the late 19th century to our contemporary moment and covers 4 domains where African American music and literature intersect with identity formation. 1. Literature and music as agents of change, that is, as protest. 2. Literature and music as implicit or explicit commentary on power, that is, as critique. 3. Literature and music and the politics of spirituality, that is, as commentary on meaning and order. And 4. Literature and music as mirrors of historical, political, and cultural change, that is, as cultural artifacts reflecting the human condition.
The struggle continues. Even after the marches and riots, the chantings and sit-ins, the struggle continues to spin.
By using music as the primary organizing principle of the course, the historical approach to text offers some useful insight. For example, the sorrow songs from Du Bois's The Souls of Black Folks, coupled with Douglas's explication of the role of song in narrative of the life, serves as jump-off points for understanding the role of protest in African American music as reflected in literature, even though Souls was published in 1903, during the later New Negro period, and Narrative was published in 1845, before the advent of the Old New Negro period. Such a juxtaposition not only allows students to consider literary history from a non-linear perspective, it also gives students a model for musical interpretation and analysis. Du Bois's interpretation of the sorrow songs as the voices of exile, along with Douglas's emphasis on the importance of being within the circle, reinforced the course's focus on music as a form of protest, often captured within the structure of African American literary production and ignored within the American mainstream public sphere. The subversive nature of slave spirituals, interpreted as a code for slave meetings and escapes, raises the issue of the use of figurative language and provides a pathway to analysis of not only the songs as literary text, but the literature of the course as well. You see, one must understand that in circumstances of complete repression and surveillance, the one activity that plantation owners allowed, and even actively encouraged, was singing. From the perspective of the master, singing was a sign of the slave's contentedness. Music served as an acceptable medium between the dangerous presence of verbal communication and the paranoia inspired by loud silence. As Douglas explains, slaves are generally expected to sing as well as to work. A silent slave is not liked by masters or overseers. Make a noise, are the words usually addressed to the slaves when there is silence among them. Still, from the perspective of the slave, singing became a rare vehicle for safe expression, a veneer of obedience that masked a deeper politics, an opportunity to express this two-ness, this double consciousness that is African American existence. Singing appeared to provide a double level of compliance. As Dart Newman points out, it is not just that slaves were singing as requested, but that in most instances they were singing the spiritual, a West African musical form assimilated within a Judeo-Christian message. In signifying conversion to Christianity, slaves appeared to mark a dutiful obedience to a master, a form of compliance. Appearances were deceiving, particularly when double consciousness was at play. This cryptic employment of double consciousness is alive and well within the works of contemporary African American literary artists like Sapphire, Dexter Palmer, and Derek Scott. Students will recognize how the pounding rhythms replicated in work and prison songs reoccur or are signified on in poems like Sterling Brown's Southern Road. How the structure of ragtime is alive and well in works like Paul Laurence Dunbar's When Melindy Sings. or how jazz rhythms and 12-bar blues structures are found in the poetry and prose of Langston Hughes. How those forms are tightened and repeated in BAM and hip-hop approaches to literary aesthetics. For example, consider Kanye's act of signifying on Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit and Tef Poe's use of the Ferguson fight for liberation for literary generative purposes in Gas Mask. Students will learn to recognize the intersection of gender and race in the blues of Bessie Smith and songs like You May Go, But This Will Bring You Back, performed by Zora Neale Hurston. Students will analyze the role of hip-hop genres as regards the approaches to literary craft and structure as employed by African-Americanist literary post-racialists such as Percival Everett and Colson Whitehead. So buckle up and let's enjoy this journey of discovery together as we discern some finer insights of African-American literature, music, and protest. As we celebrate the culture, let us remember that within African-American music and literature exist the structures of a form of political engagement that works through metaphor and double entendre, what Lawrence Levine calls techniques of indirection. Henry Louis Gates calls it signifyin. Let us remember that in many cases, the point of African-American musical production was to communicate compliance to dominant society while communicating defiance to one another. Let us remember that in many instances, Black bodies and the cultural productions ascribed are already always overdetermined within the domain of protest. You can bet on that, Jack.